الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن خير الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم صل على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وبارك وسلم. My dear sisters and brothers in Islam, in 1992, an enormously popular book was released in America. The title of the book was Men Are From Mars and Women From Venus. The book asserted that men and women are fundamentally different from each other. But that's obvious, right? Most people think, well, that's obvious. Men and women are fundamentally different from each other. But the obvious answer is the wrong answer. Because scientific research today establishes that aside from the clear physical differences between men and women are actually very much alike in talent, skill, and capacity. The differences that we observe in the behavior between men and women are learned behavior, not genetic traits. So generally, if you look at, you can test this if you have a girl and a boy at your home, or you observe children in your community, you can test this out, that generally boys will have better spatial skills than girls. It is not because they have anything genetically predisposed to having better spatial skills, such as this is why generally boys excel in sports and engineering and math because of spatial skills. They do well in these areas because the society has created expectation from boys that they need to excel in sports and they need to excel in engineering, and they have given them the resources to do so. Similarly, society expects that girls would be more emotional, more talkative. So girls develop their verbal skills, and society gives them the resources to develop their verbal skills. So with opportunity, men can become much better with emotional skills, and women can become much better with spatial skills. I'll give you one example. In 2012, for the first time in the US Olympic history, women outnumbered men in Team USA. And women accounted for 65% of the gold medals that America won. How did this thing happen? It is because of a federal program called Title IX, which was enacted 40 years ago, which mandated that men and girls and boys at universities, they receive equal opportunity to excel in sports. So men are neither from Mars and women are neither from Venus. They are both God's creation, Allah's creation. They are both from the same earth, and it is to that same earth that they all have to return to. So this scientific evidence suggesting the similarity between men and women, is it contradictory to Islamic teachings? Every Friday, most khatibs will open their khutbah with the khutbatul haja, as I opened today. And in this, one of the verses that we recite, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَّفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. People, be mindful of your Lord who created you from a single soul and from it created its mate. This verse, along with chapter 7, verse 189, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَّفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. And in chapter 42, verse number 11, فَاطِرُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ جَعَلَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. Both of these verses assert without ambiguity that men and women have the same spiritual nature. They are created out of the single soul, nafsin wahida. and our mates, azwaja, come from ourselves, and they are part of us, min anfusikum. The similarity between men and women that scientists are discovering today has been part of the Quranic message for 14 centuries. The Quran states that both genders are recipients of the divine breath, since they are both created with the same human and spiritual nature, this nafs al-wahida. فَإِذَا سَوَيْتُهُ فَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. When I have fashioned him in due proportions and breathed into him my spirit, or breathed into them my spirit. This is in Surah Hijr, ayah number 29. All human beings, male and female, are honored creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they have the same responsibility of being Khalifa on God's earth. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have honored the children of Adam. Given that men and women both have the same spirit, thus it is natural that the Quran obligates them to the same religious, moral duties and responsibilities. In Surah Al-Imran, ayah number 195, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَنِّي لَا أُودِيُ أَمَلَ أَمَلٍ مِّنْكُمْ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى بَعْضَكُمْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. I will not allow the deeds of any one of you to be lost, whether you are male or female. ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى. Each is like the other. Each is like the other. بَعْضَكُمْ مِنْ بَعْضٍ. And in chapter number 4, ayah number 124, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةَ وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ نَقِيرًا. If any of you do deeds of righteousness, be it male or female, again, ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى, and have faith, you will enter paradise. And not the least of injustice will be done to any one of them. Allah does not discriminate between men and women, and He gives them equal opportunity to earn His paradise. In Surah Ahzab, verse number 35 is absolutely amazing. The verse says, for men and women who are devoted to God, believing men and women, obedient men and women, truthful men and women, steadfast men and women, humble men and women, charitable men and women, fasting men and women, chaste men and women who remember God often, God has prepared for them a rich reward, prepared forgiveness and a rich reward. Why I say this verse is amazing? Because the repeated references to men and women. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have simply said, oh people. God has, for believing people, for obedient people. Why did He make a particular point of emphasis in repetition to point out believing men and women, obedient men and women, Muslimina wal Muslimati, Mu'minina wal Mu'minati, Qanitina wal Qanitati, and so on and so forth? I'll tell you what the answer is. In at least 30 occasions in the Quran, the female gender is mentioned separately as Untha or Unthayani. In another 25 places, the Quran singles out the female believer as Mu'minati. Again, why? Because the Quran was revealed in a society that was deeply patriarchal, where women did not have any rights, where women did not have a position in society. And to this society, the Quranic message was radical and it was progressive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to emphasize particularly so that men do not forget that there is another gender, there is half of humanity that deserves the same rights, the same opportunities that they have. So if Allah is treating men and women without discrimination, why do men take away the freedoms, rights, and opportunities from women? It's a question to ponder. It is not a Muslim question only. It is a global question. But given our message, given the Quranic message, the progressiveness of the Quranic message 14 centuries ago, it puts Muslims in a special obligatory position to ponder over this question much more carefully. I'll give you the example of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. It is reported in Sahih Muslim. He said, by Allah, we did not think that women had anything until Allah revealed about them what He revealed in the Quran. And He distributed to them what He distributed. And He goes on to the end of the hadith. Why is this hadith interesting? It is interesting that a person like Umar radiallahu anhu, who is known in Islamic history as a person with a great sense of justice and a great sense of fairness, even he did not comprehend the equality of men and women until it was revealed to him in the Quranic message. In Dr. Jamal Badawi's book, Gender Equity in Islam, he makes the following observation. Nowhere does the Quran state that one gender is superior to the other. Some mistakenly has translated Kiwama, which I will talk about it inshallah, time permitting today, in chapter 4, verse number 35, as superiority, Qawwamuna. When in reality, that word means a greater degree of responsibility. The Quran makes it clear that the sole basis for superiority of any person over another is piety and righteousness, not gender, not color, not nationality. Innakum akramakum indallahi atqakum. Verily the most honored of you in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is the most righteous. So the Quranic message is clear. But what is the state of the Muslim community, both here and around the world? Last year, a report came out from the World Economic Forum. The report is titled Global Gender Gap. And it is trying to show that what is the status of men and women in different societies with respect to things that are fundamental and common to every society. Economic opportunity, educational opportunity, political opportunity. Every society, every human being craves for these opportunities. What is the status of men and women across the world? So we looked at the gender gap, the difference between the educational opportunity, political opportunity, and health opportunity of men and women in different societies. Not a single Muslim country was in the top 10. At the bottom of the ladder, among 150 countries or more than 160 countries that they ranked, 9 of the 10 countries at the bottom were all Muslim majority countries. And it is not because Muslim countries are poor. Because even wealthy Muslim nations, such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, they do not crack the top 50. Now, in the US, the American Muslim community is generally more enlightened, generally more progressive, generally more economically empowered. So what's the status of women in this society? Only 18% of women attend Friday prayers. MashaAllah, you have a good attendance over here. Only 14% of women, when they were surveyed, ranked their Islamic centers as excellent for being women-friendly, being welcoming. Our Islamic centers welcoming towards women. Not only this, the literacy gap, something as fundamental as education between men and women in Muslim majority countries is twice the average for the rest of the world. Twice the average. Now why is this so bothersome? Because the Prophet ﷺ's command could not have been clearer on this fact of education. The hadith is crystal clear. He says, طَالَبُ الْإِلْمِ فَرِيدَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ وَمُسْلِمَةٍ. Again emphasizing that education is compulsory for both men and women. So how is it possible that women in Muslim majority societies are less educated than men in those societies? It's a contradiction, a direct contradiction of the prophetic command. Now, in the few minutes that I have left, let me go back in history and compare our contemporary situation to the earliest points in Islamic history. Here are the following facts that you cannot refute. That the first person to believe in the message of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha. If you go back in history, little bit more back in history, we can see that the city of Mecca owes its origins to a woman, Hajar. It was her faith and her remarkable resilience that allowed the city of Makkah to be born, because she was left by herself and a young child in a desolate desert. And then she negotiates the terms with the tribe of Jumu'ah as to how the water of Zamzam will be shared. So it was her responsibility to build up the city of Makkah. And then there are many firsts. In the Islamic history, there are many firsts that were established by women. The first martyr in Islam was a woman, Sumayya. The founder of the world's first academic degree-granting institution of higher education, which is still in operation today, which is the University of Qarawiyyan in Fez, Morocco, was established by a woman, Fatima al-Farhi. Many of us probably do not even know her name. How many of you have heard the name of Maryam al-Ijliya? She's also known as Maryam al-Astrolabi. She lived in the 10th century in Aleppo, Syria. Why is she interesting? Because every one of you today is a beneficiary of her invention, because all of us use a GPS today. She was one of the foremost inventors of the astrolabe, which is essentially the precursor to the GPS that we use today to position ourselves globally. Going back to again early history, another woman companion, Umara, her real name is Nusayba bin Qab. She was celebrated for her military skills because she did not take part in one battle. She took part in the battles of Uhud, Khaybar, Hunayn, and Yamama. And she was present at the signing of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And as a combatant in Uhud, she is said to have sustained wounds on her body while defending our beloved Prophet ﷺ. And praising her valor, the Prophet ﷺ said that her position on the battlefield that day was unsurpassed by anybody. He did not say it was unsurpassed by any other woman. He said it was unsurpassed by anybody, meaning between men and women, she was the most valiant warrior that day. According to the 2nd century Hijri Islamic scholar Ibn Sa'd, another woman companion is of significant note, Waraka, because she personally gave her allegiance to her beloved Prophet ﷺ. She related many hadiths from him. She is said to have memorized the Quran, and the Prophet ﷺ had authorized her to lead her household in prayers. And only due to the lack of time, I'm not going into the brilliance of Aisha radiallahu anha as a teacher and as an intellectual. As we know that Aisha radiallahu anha and Salama are among the two greatest narrators of the prophetic traditions. Much of what we know in our deen, particularly with family life, comes through the narrations of these two great women. Then on what scriptural basis, what Islamic basis can we justify the state of women around the Muslim world? So what happens? We have this early history of Islam that is progressive, that is granting women rights in a society. Think about this. Think back to the contrast between the message of Islam, the practices of our beloved Prophet, and the time period that he did this thing. This was at a time when women were treated as property. Not only in Arabia, all across the world. Europeans were still debating whether women had a soul. And it is in that context, when you look at the Islamic message in that context, you cannot help but be amazed at how much assertive the Quran was and the Prophet ﷺ was in granting these rights to women. So what happens later? This is a question that I have often pondered. That how do we have this glorious start in history and then to the current state? How from that exalted status to the status today? There's no clear answer. I do not have a clear answer as to exactly what happened. But there are conjectures among scholars as to what could have possibly happened. Two possible factors. That with time, scholarship became dominated with men, and women slowly began to be pushed away from the public sphere. That's one factor. The second factor is that as Islam expanded, Islamic reach expanded to neighboring countries, and neighboring civilizations. Islam not only changed the culture of the civilizations it touched, but Islam also adopted and adapted many of the cultural traditions of the civilizations it touched. And you can see this in the diversity of Islamic practices around the world. That often Muslims will adapt into the practices of the society that they are part of. And then since in much of the world at that time, women were not considered equals with men, Muslim societies kind of accepted that as part of their living and did not reassert the Quranic message the way it needed to be. One of the most instructive verses in the Quran is ayah number 90 in chapter 16. This verse is so foundational that almost every khatib will end their Jumu'ah Khutbah reciting this verse. It is a weekly reminder to a fundamental obligation in Islam. Inna Allaha yamuru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i bil qurba. Behold, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enjoins justice and doing good and generosity towards your fellow human beings. How can justice be practiced if you are restricting somebody else's freedom, if you are restricting their opportunities for success? In Surah Tawbah, verse number 71, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the believers, men and women, are protectors of one another. And they enjoin what is just and forbid what is evil. So both men and women have equal responsibility towards the moral well-being of the society. And women cannot fulfill their role if they are not given the proper opportunity. So the Islamic ideal of gender relationship is not that one gender is superior to another. It is not about who has control. It is not about who has the final say. It is about shared responsibility. It's about mutual responsibility. They are protectors of each other. One of the words that is described to illustrate gender relationships in Islam is libas, is clothing, garments. Think about the function of a cloth, of a garment. Number one, it protects. Number two, it beautifies. That's why you wear the expensive clothes that you wear. It beautifies. How can one gender beautify the other gender if they're oppressed? If they're always treated second class? If they're always treated at the back of the room, sit at the back of the bus, sit at the back of the room? And I'm willfully neglecting the issue of hijab. Not because it's not an important subject, but it is an overused and overabused subject. Because I see a lot of people get upset when a woman would enter the Islamic center or a mosque without a hijab. But they don't get upset when a man is not wearing proper clothing or misbehaving. Why this obsession with a piece of cloth on a woman's head? Now in the few minutes that I have, I will end with a couple of hot button topics. Inshallah, I will be available this evening for a lecture. I'm very grateful to the leadership of this Islamic Center for inviting me to speak. I will speak not only on this topic, but also on the general topic of diversity. As a Muslim community, we are one of the, particularly in America, we are among the most diverse Muslim community anywhere in the world. We are among the most diverse faith community anywhere in the world. We come from different regions, different ways in which we have grown up, different cultural practices, even different Islamic practices. How do we walk within this diverse environment? It's a challenge, but it is also an opportunity. It's a difficulty that we all face, but if we treat it right, it's an opportunity. So within that context, I'll speak about it, inshallah. If you're available, please do come. And I'll be happy to answer any questions at that time. But in the few minutes that we have left, let me touch upon three words from the Quran that have often been misinterpreted, including in many of the Quranic translations. The first is in Surah Nisa, ayah number 34, the word qawwamuna, as I mentioned before. The word qawwamuna has often been translated as that men have a degree of superiority over a woman. But the word qawwamuna has a contested meaning. At-Tabari who lived only 2 centuries after the Prophet ﷺ, conceptualized that the relation of qawama is a conditional relationship, that men have a degree of responsibility only, listen to this, only if they are taking care of the socio-economic needs of their wife. It's only in a husband-wife relationship. So as a husband, I have a degree of responsibility over my wife, but only if I'm fulfilling my obligation in being just, in being fair. I do not have a degree of superiority over your wife just because I'm a man. So it is a conditional relationship. Because the word qawwamuna, it has been used in the Quran 3 times. And in all 3 occasions, it is followed by the phrase justice and fairness. It is never expressed as an authority that men can order women around. The second word is the word wadribuhunna, daraba, perhaps one of the most mistranslated word in the Quran. It is in chapter 4, ayah number 34. As for those women whose ill will, nushuzahunna, you have to fear, you have reason to fear, then it says fa'iduhunna, admonish them first, wahjuruhunna, then forsake them from physical intimacy, and then wadribuhunna. Before we take the word wadribuhunna, let's talk about the word nushuz. Often, men have misinterpreted the word nushuz as saying, if my wife is disobedient, then I have certain rights over her. But the word nushuz does not mean disobedience. Because the word nushuz is also used in the context of men. In chapter 4, ayah number 128, it says, if women fear nushuz from her husband. So nushuz is not that as a husband, my wife did not make me an afternoon cup of tea, and so I treat that as her being disobedient to me. And thus I can divorce her or physically abuse her or emotionally abuse her. That's not the meaning of the word nushuz. Because if that was the case, then it gave women the right to say, well, if the husband does not take out the trash, then she can divorce the husband. Because they say women fear nushuz from her husband. So what does nushuz mean? The word nushuz has to be understood as a serious misbehavior on either the part of the husband or the wife that threatens the sanctity of the marriage. That it could lead to the dissolution of the marriage only under that condition is an act could be called nushuz. Then the prescription, if there is nushuz, what does the man do? Because the Quran gives the man 3 rights. So the first is, fa'iduhunna, admonish them first, explain what you are upset about. Then wahjuruhunna, if that does not work, forsake physical intimacy, and then wadribuhunna. This word, wadribuhunna, is translated, I looked at 5 translations of the Quran. In all of the translations, this is how the word wadribuhunna is translated. Beat them, in Yusuf Ali. Beat them with a parenthesis lightly in Pickthall, as a scourge, and then as spank them. Does this mean Islam permits wife beating? I hope not, because hitting somebody is a crime. And if wadribuhunna is beating or striking, and if hitting somebody is a crime, then how can the Quran sanction a crime on one hand and then speak about qist, justice, and rahmah, mercy, as being the basis of a marital relationship? How can qist and justice coexist with daraba, if daraba is beating? And the issue is not as simple as being an intellectual exercise. In one Muslim majority country, 85% of women reported that they experienced domestic violence. 50% reported being physically battered. Again, in fairness, domestic violence is not just a Muslim problem, it's a global problem. But the fact that it's happening in Muslim societies ought to be a concern for us. So what does the word wadribuhunna then mean? The word has many lexical meanings. Striking is only one of 55 meanings of that word. And I do not know why translators kept on choosing this one of 55 meanings of this word. An alternative meaning of this word is to go away, send them away. It's a possibility, and it is used in the Quranic context. In chapter 4, in the ayah number 94, it says, "O you who believe, when you go forth abroad in the cause of Allah. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu idha darabtum fi sabilillah." What does it mean? Darabtum, again the same word, daraba. Not beat fi sabilillah, but when you go away in the cause of Allah. So the word daraba can also mean going away. And then Prophet ﷺ clearly said that فَضْرِبُهُنَّ ضَرَبًا غَيْرَ مُبَرِّ. That daraba cannot mean or should not mean violence that causes torment. غَيْر مُبَرِّ means غَيْر shahin, which means not to be disgraceful, outrageous, obscene, or indecent. So thus any Muslim who beats his wife violently or causes injury commits a grave sin and should be held accountable. So literally translating وَضْرِبُهُنَّ as beating contradicts the central message of the Quran. So in conclusion, I will leave you with this short story, and I know I'm over time and I apologize. I'll leave you with this short story from Ibn Taymiyyah. I use Ibn Taymiyyah as an example because Ibn Taymiyyah is regarded as one of the more conservative voices in Islamic scholarship. So Ibn Taymiyyah on one occasion praised a woman scholar. Her name is Shaykha Fatima. She was his contemporary as a scholar. And she used to give public lectures, including in the Islamic centers, in the mosque. And it was her giving public lectures in the mosque that caused Ibn Taymiyyah some discomfort. He used to like her as a scholar, praised her as a scholar, but her giving public lectures, he was not comfortable with that. And then he said this, and I quote, "It unsettled me that she delivered lectures at the mosque, and I wished to forbid her until one night I beheld Prophet Muhammad in a dream, and he rebuked me by saying, 'This pious woman performs good works.'" And he changed his opinion. So if a person like Ibn Taymiyyah could be eliminated by the message of Islam, what is preventing us men from dealing with women much more fairly? أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله يذكركم وقوموا إلى صلاتكم فإن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. أقيموا الصلاة.